The wilderness had always been a place of beauty and brutality, and for one group of American hunters, it was about to become both at once. Deep inside a dense and unforgiving forest, a team of hunters had just completed a successful kill. They were loading up animal skins, preparing to head back to the city, when the silence shattered. Without warning, tribal warriors emerged from every direction, arrows already in flight. The tribesmen believed these hunters had taken something precious from them, the chief's daughter. And they had come not to negotiate, but to destroy. Men dropped where they stood. The hunters fought back, but they were hopelessly outnumbered, surrounded by warriors who knew every inch of that forest. The captain saw the truth quickly. If they stayed, every last man would die. He screamed for his men to grab whatever they could and make for the boat. Among the chaos, a man named Glass grabbed his son and ran. But before they could breathe, another wave of warriors appeared through the trees. The retreat became a massacre. Skins were abandoned. Men were abandoned. Only a desperate few reached the river and pushed off into the current. On the water, the survivors sat in tense silence, rifles raised, eyes scanning both banks. The forest had taken everything from them, and it might not be finished yet. The captain turned to Glass, a man who had lived among these lands far longer than most, and asked what their next move should be. Glass didn't hesitate. He told them to leave the boat and travel by land. The river was too easy to follow. The tribesmen could track them along its banks without breaking a sweat. The forest route was harder, but it was survivable. One man, Gerald, pushed back immediately. He argued the land path was suicide. Too far, too cold, too dangerous. But the captain trusted Glass, and Glass trusted the forest. Gerald fell in line, though not quietly. A few others refused entirely and chose to stay on the boat. Those men would not live to regret it. The tribal warriors found them first. For those who walked into the trees with Glass, the journey had barely begun. The captain ordered everything heavy to be left behind. The skins, the entire reason for this expedition, were buried under rocks in the hope that someday someone might return for them. It was a hollow hope, and everyone knew it. What lay ahead was weeks of walking through freezing wilderness as winter crept in from every direction. They had no real choice, so they moved forward into the cold point one night. As the group rested in the forest, Glass slipped away alone to hunt. The camp had gone without food long enough. He moved quietly through the trees, listening, watching, until he noticed movement through the undergrowth. He raised his weapon. And then he saw them. Two small bear cubs, wandering and curious. Glass knew immediately what that meant. Before he could move a single step backward, something enormous hit him from the side. The mother bear came out of nowhere, all fury and muscle and weight. She knocked the rifle from his hands, threw him across the ground, and didn't stop. Glass tried to rise, and she drove him back down. She tore into him, claws raking across his neck, his back, his arms. His flesh opened in long, deep wounds. He lay helpless beneath her. For a moment she pulled back, and Glass, bleeding and barely conscious, managed to reach his weapon. He fired, but the shot caught her throat instead of killing her. It made everything worse. Enraged and wounded, she came at him again, biting and slashing with everything she had. Somewhere in the agony, Glass found his knife. Using the last of what was left in him, he drove the blade into her again and again, until both of them rolled down a slope and came to a stop at the bottom. The bear was dead. Glass was barely alive, his throat torn open. His entire body a ruin of claw marks and bite wounds. His companions heard the gunshot and ran toward it. They found him buried beneath the bear's body and pulled him free. A man began dressing his wounds immediately, but there was little to work with and even less reason for hope. The injuries were catastrophic. His throat had been slashed open. His body looked like it had been fed through something mechanical and merciless. The hunter stood over him and reached the same quiet conclusion. Glass was not going to survive this. He might have hours, nothing more. While the group struggled with Glass's condition, something else was shifting in the forest. The tribal chief had traded the hunters' stolen skins to French trappers in exchange for horses and guns. These men, who once came at them only with bows, now had firepower, and they were still searching, relentlessly, for the chief's missing daughter. The group built a stretcher and carried Glass forward. Each man took a turn bearing the weight. They moved slowly, painfully, until they reached the foot of a steep mountain, and there the reality of the situation collapsed entirely. The trail was almost vertical. A healthy man would have struggled to climb it. Carrying a broken, barely living man up its face was simply not possible. They tried and failed. The captain made a decision that came from a place of exhausted practicality. He ordered one of his men to cover Glass's mouth. He raised his gun. He was going to end it, spare Glass the suffering and spare them all the impossibility. But Glass's son, Hawk, stepped forward and stopped him cold. The captain lowered his weapon. He couldn't do it. Not to the man who had saved all of them. Instead, the captain made an offer. Any two men willing to stay behind with Glass until he passed, to give him a proper death and a proper burial, would each receive $100 upon returning to the village. Hawk volunteered instantly. A young man named Bruiser offered to stay as well, for no reward at all. The captain insisted on having an older man in the group, and Gerald stepped forward, but only after negotiating a higher price. Hawk and Bruiser offered their shares too, bringing Gerald's total to $300. Gerald accepted. It was enough to buy a house, he said. And Glass wouldn't last 2 or 3 days anyway. The main group moved on, disappearing into the trees. 3 men and a dying man remained in the silence. Gerald sat beside Glass and waited. But Glass didn't die on schedule. Morning came. Hawk and Bruiser went into the forest to find food and water. Gerald, alone with the man he'd agreed to bury, began digging a hole in the earth nearby. He crouched next to Glass and spoke plainly. "Why won't you die? The tribesmen are tracking us. We will all be killed because of you. Blink if you understand. Blink if you're ready to let go." Glass stared at him. He refused. Gerald leaned in closer and told him that his stubbornness wasn't bravery. It was a death sentence for his own son. Glass fought it, but the pain was everywhere and it was total. He blinked. Gerald stuffed cloth into his mouth and began to choke him. And that was when Hawk came back. Hawk shoved Gerald away and aimed a gun at his chest. Gerald tried to explain. Hawk screamed. And in that moment, with Glass watching from the ground, unable to make a sound, Gerald pulled a knife and drove it into Hawk's stomach. The boy crumpled. Glass's son died right in front of him, and Glass, his throat cut open, his voice gone, could not even cry out. He could only watch. Gerald dragged Glass away from the body and hid him somewhere out of sight, then waited calmly for Bruiser to return. When Bruiser came back and asked where Hawk was, Gerald shrugged and said he'd probably just wandered off. That night they all slept. In the morning Gerald shook Bruiser awake and told him 20 tribal warriors were closing in. Bruiser was frightened but asked what would happen to Glass and Hawk if they left. Gerald grabbed Glass by the ankles and dragged him, wounds and all, across the ground to the hole he had dug. He lowered Glass into it, still breathing, and began to cover him with soil. "He's going to die either way," Gerald said. "I'm just fulfilling my promise." Bruiser watched, horrified but too scared to stop it. He knelt beside the half-covered grave and whispered an apology. He left a bottle of water on top of the soil and walked away. Glass was alone, buried alive, half dead in the earth, with the sky dimming above him. For a long while he lay still. Then something shifted in the darkness of his mind. A question, small but stubborn. If he was going to die here regardless, why die in a hole? He began to move. Slowly, agonizingly, he pushed against the soil. And after what felt like forever, he pulled himself out of the ground and crawled toward the spot where his son's body lay. He found Hawk and rested his head against him. When he finally closed his eyes, it wasn't from giving up. It was from the quiet, cold fire of something that had replaced his will to survive. Revenge. He started moving. Not quickly, There was nothing quick left in him, but he moved. He found an animal carcass and gnawed dried meat from the bone. He crawled to the edge of a bluff and saw a river below. He made it to the bank, brought the water to his lips, and felt it pour out through his neck. His throat wound was still open. He had to treat it before he could do anything else. He had only a small amount of gunpowder left. He packed the wound, pressed burning wood against it, and let the gunpowder ignite against his own flesh. The pain was beyond description. He passed out more than once. But over the following days, lying on that riverbank, surviving on river water and raw fish and whatever dead things the forest left nearby, his wounds began to close. His body, impossibly, began to heal. One night he spotted firelight through the trees. He moved toward it, bow in hand, and found a lone man sitting by a fire with a freshly killed animal. Glass stepped into the light, aimed, and made it clear he wasn't a threat. He was simply hungry. The man understood and shared the meat without hesitation. In the morning, when the man saw the full extent of Glass's wounds, he listened quietly as Glass told him everything. The bear, the abandonment, his son's murder. The man's own grief surfaced in response. He said French hunters had killed his entire family. But he had made a decision not to pursue revenge. Not because it wasn't deserved, but because he believed that vengeance belonged to something larger than any one man. He looked at Glass's wounds and said simply, "You can travel with me." They rode on together. Gerald and Bruiser, meanwhile, had reached the village. Before entering, Gerald pulled Bruiser aside and made himself clear. No one was to know what happened out there. If the captain found out, they were both finished. Bruiser agreed because he had no other option. They went before the captain together, and Gerald delivered his story smoothly. Glass had died peacefully, been given a full burial, and Hawk had been taken by the tribesmen during their escape. The captain handed over the reward money. Bruiser walked away without taking his share. Gerald picked it up too and offered a quiet excuse on the boy's behalf. Then he left. Out in the wilderness, a blizzard arrived without mercy. Glass collapsed in the snow, his healing wounds reopening in the cold. The man traveling with him built a small shelter, stripped Glass down, wrapped him, and built a fire outside to keep him alive through the night. When morning came and the storm had passed, Glass woke to find the man gone. He stepped outside and found him, hanged from a tree not far from camp. French hunters. The same ones Glass had been hearing about. He spotted them nearby, and among the chaos, he saw a girl being attacked. He recognized the situation instantly. He moved in from behind, killed the man assaulting her, and freed her. She was the tribal chief's daughter, the very girl whose disappearance had started all of this. Glass scattered the remaining French hunters by unleashing their horses and firing into the air. Then he disappeared back into the wilderness. The tribesmen were closing in again. Glass rode hard, but they were gaining. He exchanged shots with the nearest warriors, pushing his horse to its limit, until suddenly there was no more ground left, just a cliff edge and a ravine below. He had no choice. He threw himself over the edge. The horse hit the rocks below and died on impact. Glass hit a tree on the way down and crashed into a deep snowdrift. He was alive but barely. The cold had become a new enemy. He sliced open the horse's belly, removed its organs, and crawled inside the carcass for warmth. He spent the night there, curled inside a dead animal in a snowfield at the edge of the world. When morning came, he climbed out and kept moving. Back at the village, a French trapper arrived seeking help. He told the captain that a lone man had killed their leader and freed their horses, scattering their entire group. As evidence, he produced a water bottle, the same one Bruiser had left on Glass's grave. Bruiser recognized it immediately. The captain connected everything. He got on his horse. They found Glass 30 miles out, standing in the snow, alive in a way that no one could quite explain. The captain stared at him in disbelief. Gerald had told him Glass was dead and buried. Now Glass stood in front of him and told him the truth, every detail without leaving anything out. The captain rode straight back to the village. The safe had been emptied. Gerald was gone. The captain grabbed Bruiser and raised his hand. Glass stepped between them. He told the captain plainly that Bruiser had nothing to do with this. He was a scared boy who had been manipulated, and he deserved to go free. The captain released him. Then Glass and the captain mounted up and went after Gerald. They tracked his horse's prints through the snow until the trail split into two paths. The captain went left. Glass went right. Gerald had been waiting. He stepped out from behind a boulder and held the captain at gunpoint. The captain told him he was accused of murder and to come quietly. Gerald didn't. The moment the captain reached for his weapon, Gerald shot him dead. Glass heard the shot and arrived to find the captain's body in the snow. Gerald was already gone. Glass moved fast. He placed the captain's body upright on the horse, using a branch to keep his posture straight, and climbed on behind him, lying flat like a dead man. Gerald saw the horses coming and assumed the living rider in front was Glass and the limp figure behind was the captain's corpse. He fired at the man in front. The figure fell. Gerald walked over slowly, satisfied. He turned the body over and stared into the captain's face. Before he could process what had happened, Glass rose from behind the saddle and put a bullet in his shoulder. Gerald ran. The chase ended at a riverbank. They fought brutally, both of them damaged and exhausted, until the tribesman appeared on the opposite bank. Glass had Gerald pinned. He could have finished it. And then something from weeks ago, from the words of a man who later died hanging from a tree, surfaced in his mind. That man had lost everything to violence and still chose not to become it. He had said that vengeance wasn't something a man could carry without it destroying him. It belonged somewhere else entirely. Glass looked at Gerald. And he threw him into the river. The current carried Gerald to the other bank. The tribesmen were waiting. They took him and killed him. Then they crossed back toward Glass and stopped in front of him. No words were spoken. They looked at him, and then they simply turned and left. The chief's daughter had already told her father what Glass had done, how he had come out of nowhere and freed her from the men who held her captive. Because of that, Glass was allowed to live. He stood alone on the riverbank as the forest went quiet around him. Every person who had wronged him was gone. His son was still dead. The wilderness had taken almost everything from him, and in the end it had given him back only his life. Whether that was enough would be a question the silence didn't answer.